Hello and welcome to another Rest of Season Top 150 Rankings Show. My name is Adam Levitan. Each and every Wednesday on this very program, I am joined by Michael Leone and Mark Dankenbring to talk how we would draft if the season started tomorrow. Mark, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Adam. Sitting here today in my Albert Pujols Cardinals jersey, probably from when I was in about the 6th or 7th grade. So shout out to Pujols for getting 700, Cardinals going into the playoffs. And excited to talk some football here today with you guys, though.
I'm not sure if you're aware, Mark, but baseball is a dead sport. Anyways, Leone, how's it going?
I'm just amazed Pujols is still playing, but apparently he's doing well. So
there you go. Just got to get, alert the masses out there. Pujols is still breaking 700. I mean, the real story in baseball this season.
Each week we do a rest of season top 150 rankings. We put a ton of work into this. We think it's very useful for trades, for waiver ads. We take this really seriously. It's just not some BS list that we pull out of our ass. You can get access to our rest of season top 150 through DraftKit Pro or through the in-season package. Note, though, that we do have specific rankings for underdogs. So if you're doing best ball underdog rest of season drafts, we do have specific rankings for that here. If you go up to season long best ball, the underdog resurrection rankings, and we'll have the week 5 underdog best ball rankings up soon. Be sure to check those out. If you haven't played on underdog, promo code ETR. Let me just go ahead and look at producer Adam. Boom. Just cover up Leone's face. Shout out. There he is. Shout out to us. All right. Rest of season top 150. We should start at the top. Everybody finds the top always most interesting. I actually don't find it the most interesting, but this Cooper Kupp role continues to be amazing. And when Allen Robinson is just like an afterthought, there's like no threat whatsoever to Cooper Kupp. And then we have Saquon Barkley again, number 1. I think the Christian McCaffrey quad being a non-issue and Christian McCaffrey showing he can still catch 9 balls for 81 yards and a touchdown in a game makes it really, really close between these guys. But, I don't think that there's much controversial up here in the top at all. We do have Barkley slightly ahead of McCaffrey, and I think that's more for team concerns, but I have some pretty big team concerns about the Giants too. So anyways, Mark, have you thought about kind of the first 5 or 6 picks here?
Yeah, I think just want to reiterate on Saquon, the volume there is just going to be so massive, looking like he'll get between 18 and 25 carries every week. And then with all the wide receiver attrition there, he can easily lead the team in targets moving forward. He currently leads them in catches. And so I think, we can bank on a minimum of 20 to 25 touches for Saquon every week. And we've just seen the burst from him this year. If he's going to bust some 30, 40-yard plays pretty much every game. The touchdowns haven't really come too much yet for Saquon, and he's still crushing. So I think that's, pretty easy RB1. And yeah, I mean, it was great to see McCaffrey get out there and handle all the snaps this week and see kind of a vintage receiving role from him that we hadn't quite seen yet this season. And then I think the top 5 is really solid, like Kupp, Jefferson, Diggs. I'm super pumped to have any of those guys on my teams at this point. And, they're all just great players and great weekly fantasy upside.
The Jonathan Taylor ankle issue, he's going to be out on Thursday. It doesn't sound overly serious, but I think it's enough for me at least to consider taking some of these wide receivers ahead of JT. I don't want to overreact to this ankle thing, but the ankle thing, Matt Ryan is playing like really, really poorly. We always had the Nyheim Hines threat. Taylor's efficiency has been a problem this year. So Leone, how would you compare some of these wide receivers? And I specifically want to ask about Jamar Chase. I think there's some panic out there on Jamar Chase, which took me by surprise. I didn't think anyone was panicking on Jamar Chase, but it sounds like people are. I would personally consider all 3 of these wide receivers over JT if I was on the clock, but certainly close. What do you think about Chase versus JT and Chase versus these other wide receivers?
Yeah, and one of the hard, intricacies of these rankings is as if you're redrafting today or like as a trade chart? Because in a lot of spots, if you have Jonathan Taylor as your RB1, you might not be able to move him for a wide receiver. You might just be dead at running back, especially if you drafted pretty wide receiver heavy elsewhere, like we suggested. So if I was redrafting today, I'd probably take those guys ahead of Jonathan Taylor. But I also know in leagues where I went kind of 0 RB, I'm actually trying to get Jonathan Taylor for a decent price tag. It's probably as low as you're going to get him. He is someone that would have been on the by Leone underperforming running back list for the week if he were playing. because his targets have actually been a little bit better than maybe we expected. The team has just played so bad, which was the risk for him all along, was that he was a little bit more game script and team context dependent than some of the other, top backs we've had in the past few years. But I still feel pretty good about him. And yeah, anyone who's worried about Jamar Chase, I think needs to chill out. He basically has had the exact same workload as Stephon Diggs. They both have 41 targets for around 400 air yards. They both have 8 red zone targets, but Diggs has outscored him by 29 fantasy points. And it just goes to show you how the efficiency can be volatile in small samples. Last year was the opposite. Chase just crushed Diggs on efficiency. It's been Diggs so far this year, but I think these two are really similar rest of the season. I'd have them back to back in my personal ranks. And if you can move, AJ Brown for Chase or something like that, I think I'd make that lateral move at the same position to try and, just buy a little bit low on a guy I think has a higher ceiling.
Totally agree. If people are selling Jamar Chase, I am certainly buying. One of the things we brought up last week, and by the way, we'll do it again this week. We did a segment at the end where it was like one transaction. So I said buy Chris Godwin. I actually didn't think Chris Godwin would come back to a full-time role this quickly, but he was in a really good role on Sunday night. We've moved him all the way up to 27th overall. Now, I want to be clear that the 2 wide receiver set the Bucs used was Evans and Godwin. In 3 wide, Godwin went into the slot. It is such a valuable role to be on the field in 2 wide and then in the slot in 3 wide. Russell Gage was out there in 3 wide, and Julio was the one who was mixing in. Julio was the one who just barely snuck in to our top 150. Julio only ran 17 routes on 43 Tom Brady dropbacks in that game, or maybe it might have been 53 Tom Brady dropbacks in that game. Now, I know Julio had the PCL. He's old. He's always been hurt. But yeah, it's thin. I think the one that people are asking about, and Justin's asking about here, is the Fournette stuff, Mark, because Fournette, for the first time, we saw him challenged seriously by Rachaad White. Rachaad White comes in, plays almost as many snaps as Leonard Fournette, runs almost as many routes as Leonard Fournette. Are we selling Lenny? We still have a pretty strong rank on him here at 17th overall.
I'm not quite sure what to do with Lenny. I'm a little torn. I think the game script that Rachaad White saw, so many more snaps and touches, I think it was just because they were trailing so much. White only had 2 touches in the first half. And obviously, they only handed the ball off, I think, 6 times the entire game. So just the running back touches there are going to look rough for Lenny. But I think it was mostly game script oriented. I would expect Fournette to still be, the primary RB1 there in tighter games and in important situations and like goal line situations. I'm still expecting Fournette to get that workload, but obviously, they put some draft capital into Rachaad White. Lenny is an aging running back. And, I think it's natural to think that the rookie is going to continue to eat into Fournette's workload and upside throughout the season. So I think now, I'm not necessarily sure who is buying Lenny. I think it's a decent time to sell. But, I will note that just like the Bucs, I think with Godwin and Evans back are going to revert to their extremely pass heavy ways and be a top 3 leader in pass rate over expectation moving forward. So if you're in a half PPR league and, the pass catching isn't as valuable as Fournette can be in a full PPR, I think it's fine to move him. But I still expect he'll get a ton of high value touches moving forward around the goal line and still get worked into the passing game. So it's kind of a middling response, but it's always depends on what you can get back for him.
It's hard on 2 fronts. First, like after everybody knows, people in fantasy are getting way more sophisticated. Everybody knows now that Rachaad White played a ton in the second half of that game. I'm not sure what you're getting for Leonard Fournette right now, so I wouldn't just be like fire sailing him. I just don't think that we can really predict that Leonard Fournette's going to see 100%. You don't need 100% of the running back work in Tampa, though, to be an awesome fantasy asset. And I'm fine where we have Leonard Fournette at 17th overall. Leone, is Geno for real? I mean, I'm walking the street. I'm going to get some breakfast, and people come up to me, Adam, is Geno Smith for real? Can you believe what's going on with Geno Smith? He is in the top 7 of almost every stat category for passing. And that includes a bunch of advanced stuff like completion percentage over expectation, a bunch of efficiency stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Geno did not make our top 150, but his weapons are moving up a little bit. We still have Lockett relatively low, though. The striking thing to me is how accurate Geno has been, and B, they've been more pass heavy under Geno than they were under Russ. And it's really tight with Metcalf and Lockett. I mean, there's a lot of good things here. So what do you think about the sustainability of the way Geno is playing for the Seattle offense?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good sign for the pass catchers that we have this absurd completion percentage. He's been over 70% completion rate in all 4 of his starts this year, which is really impressive. And he's thrown multiple touchdowns in 3 of the 4 starts. So I think you've got to feel much better if you bought the dip on like Metcalf and Tyler Lockett over the offseason. My concern is in 3 of the 4 games, he still attempted 30 pass attempts or less, even with them throwing a bit more, even with them playing a little bit faster clip. The last 2 matchups were really favorable against Atlanta and Detroit and are inflating things a little bit. So I don't want to go too crazy on this. The floor on Lockett and Metcalf has been raised meaningfully, and that's a really good thing for your fantasy teams. But as far as like one quarterback league stuff, Geno isn't really someone that I'd be looking to add except for in case of emergency.
You're on mute, Adam.
Quarterbacks, I think people are understanding how much value there is in guys who can run. And Lamar and Hurts and Josh Allen, it's just such a big separator. Now, Kyler has not played well. I believe Kyler is still the quarterback 9, despite Arizona struggles, despite Cliff being just an absolute king dolt. I mean, the routes that he has these wide receivers running is so preposterous. Like you see what Christian Kirk's doing in Jacksonville. Cliff never would have gotten that out of him. Whatever. That's not the point. Our job isn't to say what Cliff is doing poorly. It's to say what's going to happen going forward with this offense. They got Rondale Moore back. They're going to get DeAndre Hopkins back, I believe, in week 7. I'm not sure when their bye is, either week 7, they'll get him back, or week 8. Marquise Brown is playing at a really, really high level. I'm not giving up on Kyle. Even when he plays bad, even the Cardinals play bad, he still scores. You know what I mean? And so I still like Kyler. I know there's people panicking out there. Mark, what do you think about Kyler rest of season?
Yeah, we've continued to move Kyler up kind of every week, and I think we will continue to do so until Hopkins comes back. We still have 2 more games without him, but as you mentioned, Rondale Moore returned and was essentially a full-time player for them. So he's definitely getting weapons back. The Cardinals defense is horrible. They're second last in defensive DVOA from Football Outsiders, going to continue to give up a ton of points. And saw someone tweet that Kyler is, I think, 30th in first half scoring among QBs and then second in the second half. So they're just going to continue to play from behind, run a lot of plays. You mentioned it's kind of been like a horizontal raid offense there for Cliff, just a lot of short and intermediate stuff for Kyler. So it's a lot of volume, high completion percentage stuff. And then in the first 3 games, Kyler only ran 12 total times, so about 4 times per game. And in his career, he's averaged around 7 rushing attempts per game. So I'm expecting that to come up a little bit more. And then, hopefully the touchdowns just follow once he gets Hopkins back and the offense becomes a little bit more efficient with more talent out there. So I think Kyler and like Tom Brady, honestly, are the 2 QBs I'd be trying to trade for right now. I think the top 3 are kind of untouchable at this point. No one wants to give them up, but I think Kyler, is a good buy right now and someone I'd be willing to trade, kind of like a wide receiver 2, or, just a position if you have stacked up. I'd be willing to dish some excess there for Kyler.
Yeah, I would say that the bear case on Kyler is what PJ is bringing up. He's running so little. I was not impressed with the way DeAndre Hopkins played last year, and I've not been impressed in a single game that Rondale Moore has played all year. Like Greg Dortch has been better than Rondale Moore. So the bull case is what we said. DeAndre Hopkins comes back and plays great. Kyler starts running more. Rondale Moore plays well. The bear case is that these guys can't really elevate Kyler at all. And so, yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, but I like being aggressive on Kyler just for the ceiling case. I think Matt has a good question here about the Miami stuff. Tua situation impact your confidence in Tyreek and Waddle. So I think, and Evan and I talked about this yesterday, I think Teddy is like a borderline NFL starter. He's not good, but he's a borderline NFL starter. The way this team is schemed by Mike McDaniel, our king Mike McDaniel, and what Tyreek and Waddle can do individually gives me some pretty good hope that they'll be fine for as long as Tua is out. And I have no idea how long Tua is going to be out. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of outside pressure and optics pressure to keep Tua out for a very long time here. I don't know if they'll submit to that or how the NFL is going to handle it. But either way, I think Hill and Waddle are going to be fine. Leone, real quick on that, any concerns for Hill and Waddle with Teddy?
Not really. I think this scheme is so strong in terms of getting the ball to their top two players. They're both near the tops in the league in targets per route run. And Mike McDaniel's a really smart offensive coach, and Teddy is a very accurate quarterback overall. So they're getting these guys the ball in all sorts of situations all over the field. So I'm really not too concerned. I mean, you feel like the ceiling outcomes maybe drop down a little bit because Tua was playing so well, but from a floor perspective, I think these guys are going to they're going to be so flush with opportunities and they're going to perform.
All right, Leone, I'll give you a chance here for the season-long bros. I know you're out there grinding the waivers because every time Leone asks me to do a league, I say I'll do it only if you grind the waivers. I can't face it. And so I know Leone's out there grinding the waivers. The big question of the week is how much to bid on Mike Boone. I'm sure there's some people who have waivers coming tonight that decide how much to bid. Leone, what do you think about waivers and the Denver running back situation now that we know Javonte Williams is out for the year?
Yeah, I think Boone might be my highest bid that I've made all season. I'm going to be really aggressive on Mike Boone. As the window shrinks over the course of the season to spend that fab money, I think now's a pretty good time. I think there's enough uncertainty in this backfield where, Javonte Williams was seeing a lot of volume in the past game. It seems like Mike Boone is probably their preferred choice there over Melvin Gordon. I still like Melvin Gordon a lot, but there's some uncertainty there as he ages and with the fumbling woes that he's had. He didn't play until late in the first half last week, and his first touch was a fumble return for a touchdown, already his fourth fumble this season. So, not panicking on Melvin Gordon. I think Gordon's, immediately like a top 70 player overall, but the risk reward on Boone, I think, is worth really aggressive bids, maybe like 30% of your fab, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows Mike Boone from preseason, and Melvin Gordon has had his struggles for sure. I think right there, that's enough to be aggressive on Mike Boone. But, there's also people out there who think Mike Boone sucks and he's not even close to how good Melvin Gordon is. And we don't really know what Nathaniel Hackett is thinking, because I'm not sure a lot of time Nathaniel Hackett is thinking at all. So it's hard it's hard to know.
I'd like to put in a word for Melvin Gordon. I think, just kind of removing yourself and thinking back to like a month ago, people overreact to these 1 to 2 week samples so much. I mean, all off season, we were pounding the table for Melvin Gordon saying, oh, he's such a great pick in the 10th round. You get weekly startability. And if anything happens to Javonte, he could be a league winner. And then just because he has a couple fumbles, in the first few weeks, like everyone's way off and on Mike Boone. I think now is a decent time to get Melvin. He's obviously claimed in a lot of leagues, so you'd probably have to trade for him, but I think it's a decent time with people kind of panicking the signing of Latavius Murray. I mean, this guy is a practice squad, I think, like 30-year-old running back. Like I'm not too worried about him. Right. So I think the risk reward here on Melvin Gordon potentially being, a high end RB2, potentially RB1 if he gets the workload and does well with it, I think is worth the risk at this point.
Yeah.
The answer is kind of both, I guess. Like I don't really have an anti Melvin Gordon stance. There's not going to be a lot of guys like Boone that have enough uncertainty in that upside. That's kind of my case for Boone in free agency, is more that than it is, directly like I think Melvin Gordon's going to be bad.
We'd be remiss, Leone, if we didn't do our weekly Kyle Pitts update. We've dropped him to 54th overall now. Now, you can give guys kind of a pass when their team only throws the ball 20 times in a game, right? But it's concerning because on those 20 dropbacks, Kyle Pitts only ran 12 routes. And even when they do throw, he's not featured. They're not scheming him to get the ball. And so I understand where people are frustrated beyond just, I'm frustrated just beyond just, hey, they won the game. I get it. They only have to drop back 20 times. I get it. When they do throw, I need to see them featuring Kyle Pitts more. They have done no such thing for a player they spent the number 4 overall pick on. This staff, Amico pointed out, this isn't some geek off the street that some fantasy nerds are hoping for. The Atlanta Falcons, this staff spent the 4th overall pick 1 year ago on Kyle Pitts. Leone, is 54th low enough at this point for Kyle Pitts?
I mean, it's been insane, the usage. The thing I'll say for Pitts is, we know the talent is absolutely there. And also Atlanta in 3 of their 4 games has had an expected pass rate below 55%. For a team that is supposed to be very bad, that's a really low expected pass rate. That's one of the lowest in the league. So they've had some fluky game scripts that are going to turn around starting this week against Tampa Bay, where they're just going to have to throw the ball more. They're averaging under 25 pass attempts per game. So The route stuff I can't speak to. Like, I don't know why he's not running a route on like 85% of dropbacks. In that regard, all you can do is hope that it gets better. But as bad as things have been, he's second among all tight ends in the NFL in air yards. The upside's there. And frankly, if you're thinking about what to do with him, there's just almost no one that's worth starting over him. Like, you might feel like so-and-so has a better floor or whatever, but ultimately, if you've drafted Kyle Pitts, you're not going to have another tight end on the roster that has more upside. So you're worth sacrificing a little bit of weekly floor for the high-end ceiling from Pitts, even though we haven't seen it materialize yet.
I mean, if I had Kyle Pitts, and I do have Kyle Pitts, I'm not doing anything. I'm continuing to start him. Like, I'm not like just going to sell him for peanuts. I'd rather go down with the ship at this point whatsoever. And the point Leone made is an excellent one. So far, Falcons have played Saints, Rams, Seahawks, Browns. Falcons defense, I think, is better than people realize, but still upcoming. They have Bucks, 49ers, Bengals. They have a Chargers game in there. I mean, they're going to have to absolutely throw the football more. We got a hit question about Tyler Higbee, Mark. Tyler Higbee. I don't know what McVay and the Rams are doing, but a huge part of their offense right now is screen passes to Tyler Higbee. We've moved him up to the TE7 here. He has the most targets out of any tight end in the league, and we have people saying, "Oh, should I start Higbee over Pitts?" I get it. I really do. Higbee is a big part of this team's offense, and right now Pitts is not. What do you think about Higbee rest of season?
I'm loving Higbee. He's one of my most owned tight ends, thankfully, and I think everything here has been great. We moved him up in the rankings, as you mentioned, to tight end 7, and also above Allen Robinson, because he's pretty much iced Allen Robinson as the number 2 target here in the Rams offense. He has a 25% target share or higher in 3 of the games. The other game, was 16%, so still very solid for a tight end. And there's honestly a case to be made that he could be performing even better at this point. He has 6 red zone targets, and 5 of those have come inside the 10, which is tied with Darren Waller and Travis Kelce, other elite tight ends. And he's only caught 2 of those and has 0 touchdowns. So, there's a case to be made that Higbee should have a touchdown or 2 based on his volume at this point. And then you mentioned it, Sean McVay is drawing up a screen or 2 per game for Higbee. And I think with this offensive line, they're just going to have to continue to get the ball out quickly. Their center just got hurt. Like, they're just continuing to cycle guys in and out of this offensive line. So they're going to need Stafford to get the ball out quickly. And I think that's going to come with screens to Higbee and, some lower ADOT passing attempts. So the upside, I think, is relatively questionable, at this point, just because of of his talent. He's definitely not the most talented tight end, but the volume, I think, is really going to be there. So for PPR, I think he's a great tight end play. There was a question, would you start him over Kyle Pitts? I would say no at this point, again, just because of that upside. But I understand the kind of argument for it and why you would be thinking that.
Leone, I'll give you a chance here to victory lap Josh Jacobs' season. Just from a macro point of view, and not not to get too in the weeds about season-long strategy, but when you can get starting running backs on good offenses in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, I mean, think about what you were able to get. You're able to get Miles Sanders. You're able to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You're able to get Josh Jacobs. You're able to get Ramondre Stevenson. You were able to get a lot of good running backs on good teams late. It just strikes me as it's set up as like the best year ever for hero RB or zero RB. And I know people hate that stuff. I don't even want to call it that. I just want to say I'd rather have wide receiver. I'd rather have quarterback than running back. I think people get turned off by the name of the strategy. I'd just rather have these guys. And then when it gets to rounds 8, 9, and 10, it's like, yes, I didn't feel great about Josh Jacobs before the season. I didn't like Josh Jacobs. When he was there in the 7th and 8th round, how did I not take Josh Jacobs? I know. I don't want to hear it. And now, is it too late? Now is it, I messed up. Who's going to give away Josh Jacobs now, especially after the game that he just had? So I don't even think we can trade for Josh Jacobs now. Hopefully you were smart like Leone and not like me and just drafted Josh Jacobs. So go ahead, Leone.
Well, I mean, the funny thing was, like, I didn't even really like Josh Jacobs. Like, people are like giving me kudos for Josh, but I was just like willing to draft him in the 7th round, which isn't like saying much. To your point, I do think, like, a lot of times what happens is people either draft running backs too early, even if they go wide receiver heavy, or the people that do the extreme strategies where they don't draft a running back for a long time, they're so used to waiting to rounds 9 through 11 to grab some of like the Rachaad White contingency upside backs. And if this year, if you had adjusted to the fact that, oh, if I just, start drafting that running back a round or two earlier, I can get Miles Sanders and Josh Jacobs and have done a mega wide receiver heavy build. And like, you're just absolutely smashing, which some of that's just results oriented. I think Jacobs at 60th overall in our rankings is actually too light. His workload has been amazing. He's the unquestioned starter. He's running routes. The offense is decent enough, probably even above average. So I would take him ahead of like Miles Sanders, probably. I think he's closer to a top 50 overall player, but to your point, even if you think he's like 50th overall, the person who has Josh Jacobs and was willing to draft him is likely not going to sell him for a comparable player at that point.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Mark, I'm sure a lot of people are asking or wondering, we keep flip-flopping on Miami, and this is at least partly on me. I thought before the season that Edmonds would have the 50% of the base work, all of the pass down work role, and that's like one of my favorite roles for a late round running back. It turned out that Miami had other ideas. Mostert is playing a lot on pass downs. Mostert is playing a lot ahead of Chase Edmonds. Regardless, I'm not confident enough to say that that's going to stick for the whole season, but it certainly seems that way now. We have about a 23 spot gap between Mostert and Edmonds in the rest of the season, top 150. Mark, how do you see the Miami backfield playing out?
Yeah. So if we just go back to our, post week 1 rankings, like we had Edmonds pretty high up as a low end RB2 because he got the majority of the snaps in week 1, played like 63%, and Mostert, was well behind. And then this past week, week 4 against the Bengals, Mostert was all the way up at 72%, and Chase Edmonds, was the inverse at 28%. So it seems like McDaniel is leaning more into Mostert here. Mostert is a 31-year-old back and has had a long injury history. So I think at this point in time, like Edmonds is still a good stash and not someone I would necessarily be selling low on, because I think the upside is still there if Mostert were to go down. But just the utilization by McDaniel of Mostert at this point has been really strong. He's getting carries. He's running more routes than Edmonds. So I think at this point it's fair to have Mostert ahead. But again, I'm not necessarily panicking and selling on Chase Edmonds because I think it's more likely than not that Mostert, gets banged up and hurt at some point in the season. At that point, I think Chase Edmonds is going to become a great play.
Couple quick ones here, Leone. I think part of this is about knowing your opponent. And so Kenny Pickett gets in there for the second half for the Steelers, replacing Mitch Trubisky. And Kenny Pickett showed an affinity for throwing to George Pickens. There were 14 pass attempts, including penalties, for Kenny Pickett, and George Pickens saw 5 of those targets. Now, people are getting myself included, getting to a full 3.9 inches over one half of football against the Jets. My inclination is that people might be too high on George Pickens right now. And that's not, I have George Pickens in best balls. I have George Pickens. Like, I don't want to sell George Pickens, but I feel like people are extrapolating one half of football too hard. And you see him, we have him 101st overall. So again, like these trade spots, it's hard for us to come on here and tell you guys what to do because we don't know what your opponents or what the guy who thinks of George Pickens has him or not, or the guy who wants George Pickens has him or not. But in a vacuum, I get the sense people are just like too excited. Maybe I'm just a wet blanket, and George Pickens and Kenny Pickett have been playing together since the summer. They have some shower narrative going on, and Pickett is going to throw at Pickens at 30% of the time. I just don't know that's the case. Leone, what do you think of Kenny Pickett's debut and how it affects what's going on in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, we thought that the Pittsburgh quarterback play couldn't get worse, and then Mitch Trubisky comes in and averages 5.6 yards per attempt. So Pittsburgh has dealt with some really, really bad quarterback play for years now, from Ben Roethlisberger to these first 4 games with Mitch Trubisky. So immediately I do like betting on some of the uncertainty where, forget if Kenny Pickett's good. Like, what if Kenny Pickett's just an average NFL quarterback? Like, the upside's immediately there for a target earner like Deontay Johnson and a prospect like George Pickett, who, if it wasn't for some health concerns and whatnot, might have been one of the top 3 wide receivers off the board. I know there were some really sharp dynasty players that after, Pickens's camp had him as the 102 in rookie drafts, like immediately. And that's coming from like people who reliably play dynasty, not people just like overreacting to news. So I think the upside's huge, but to your point, Adam, like I dropped him in a league last week and I'm trying to get him back this week, but
Oh my God, you fish. How did you drop him?
I had a really deep bench. I have him in another league, and in this league I dropped him for Kadarius Toney, and that's sort of what happens. If for some reason he's out there, I'd be super aggressive getting him. As far as targeting him in trades, though, it is really difficult. Like, I don't know. We have Khalil Herbert ranked similarly. If someone's desperate at running back, like make that offer, but I don't know if that's going to get it done. It's kind of like, hopefully you weren't a fish like me and dropped him last week, because the price immediately went up a ton for anyone that's paying attention.
Last one here I want to bring up before we get to our move to make segment of the program is the Breece Hall stuff. Another spot where I think people who are paying attention should be deservedly excited about Breece Hall. I've actually been excited since week 1 because immediately he showed an ability to earn targets and be successful with them. And like, that's the best thing to me to look for out of running back. This dude came in his first NFL game, was earning targets at a really, really high rate and at a really high volume. And now we're starting to see him move ahead as a pure rusher ahead of Michael Carter also. So anybody who's paying attention, I don't know how you'd be able to get Breece Hall from them, but I think if you have Breece Hall, you have to be pretty excited. Mark, what did you think of Zach Wilson's 22 debut and anything else on the Jets?
Definitely excited about Breece Hall. He's officially outsnapped Michael Carter each of the last 2 weeks and looks like a game script independent back at this point, which is really exciting for fantasy purposes. We saw him get over 60% of the snaps this past week, and then he has about 40 more rushing yards on just one more carry than Michael Carter. So I think, we've kind of seen the explosiveness and just talent upside with him is far superior to Carter. And then his 26 targets right now are second most among running backs. We were a little worried about the Jets going from Flacco to Zach Wilson and that number coming down, but it certainly seems like he's going to be involved in the passing game. And at this point, his catch rate is pretty horrendous. It's at 58%, which is the worst among all running backs with at least 10 targets. Austin Eckler is the only running back with more targets than Breece Hall, and he's caught 27 of 29 targets, which is just, insane catch rate. But I digress to Breece Hall. I think, he should easily be a top, RB2 moving forward, potential for RB1 if he continues to widen the gap between him and Carter. And then, obviously the talent is there. I'm a little worried about the offensive line. They continue to lose guys at the tackle position. And they've also run a ton of plays through the first 4 weeks. They've run like over 70 plays every single week. So I think that might come down a little bit, but overall, yeah, very bullish on Breece Hall. Would trade, if you need a running back, I think he's the top kind of guy to go get at this point, and would be willing to ship off a wide receiver for him.
And just one quick note on Breece Hall. There have been 3 running backs that have more than 31 air yards in a week this season. There have been 3 running back performances. 2 of those 3 are Breece Hall in week 3 and Breece Hall in week 4. Yeah. So that's part of the reason his catch rate's a little bit lower, but it also points to like some really legitimate upside in the receiving game for Hall.
Yeah, Breece Hall was the one guy in the dead zone that I think we were on because he's a good player. Period. Most of the guys in the dead zone just suck, like Zeke, and these guys just like suck. Breece Hall is a very, very good ascending player, and so there's some nuance in the dead zone lining before the season. Leone, before we get to the waiver for our resident waiver or Pacheco, who would you bid more on? I know this is a trade offer, but I'm sure a lot of these guys are on waivers for most people. Who would you rather have, Algier or Pacheco?
I'd rather have Pacheco. I think the offense just provides more upside. He's starting to work into base a little bit more than he did the first few weeks. I know we took like a rushing under, even though if we had taken that last week, we'd been toast. He was clearly part of the game plan early. And Algier, I'm like, Cordell Patterson's hurt right now. Damian Williams is hurt right now. And I'm still kind of on the fence about starting him in league. So like if you get the double injury and you're still on the fence, I get worried about the upside. It does seem like Algier will be the passing down back and get some base rush work. I am worried that Caleb Huntley is going to take the goal line work from him. So again, like if one guy's getting 2 injuries and is still like a borderline starter, I don't know how great the upside is. So I'll take Pacheco.
I think Pacheco too. I think it's a little bit too muddled for me in Atlanta long-term. Certainly short-term, I think Algier is probably going to have a little bit better opportunity. Okay. It is time for the move to make segment of the program. I think we can give ourselves A's last week. It's just like Roger Goodell. Whoever is making the sentence also gets to be the judge. And so we're the judge. We're giving ourselves A's for last week. I forget what Mark and Leone said. I said trade for Chris Godwin. Leone, what did you say last week?
I said trade for Breece Hall.
Trade for Breece Hall. Mark, what
And
did you
I
say?
said buy Joe Mixon.
Oh, baby. All right. I will give Mark the honors here for the move to make ahead of week 5.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is, kind of like a couple moves. You have a couple options here because I'm going to say to buy Bills wide receivers that aren't named Stephon Diggs. Jamison Crowder broke his ankle this past week and is going to be out for the season, which just opens up, I think, a lot of target opportunity for the rest of the Bills offense. So right now I'm talking about Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, and then Khalil Shakir if you're in a deeper league. Gabe Davis, week 1 during that Bills-Rams game, he scores that long touchdown. Everyone's tweeting, oh my God, imagine not drafting Gabe Davis. Going to be such a long season for all the Gabe Davis faders. And those have quieted a bit just after, what seems like a minor ankle injury. The Bills' upcoming schedule looks really favorable for wide receivers. Mike Clay had it as the second most wide receiver friendly fantasy schedule the rest of the way. So I think, the Bills being a high pass rate over expectation team, they're going to continue to throw the ball a ton. I'm expecting better things for Gabe Davis and people are panicking on him a little bit. And then with Isaiah McKenzie, he's been splitting slot snaps with Jamison Crowder and still producing at a high level. So without Crowder there, I think his route participation should be more up to like the 65 and 70%, where it's been closer to 50% at this point. So should just see a boost in targets there. And then Khalil Shakir is, he can play both inside and outside at this point. He's run about 20 routes and about half of those have come from the slot and half from outside. So, he's probably free in this league in leagues. You can pick him up at this point, but Gabe Davis and Isaiah McKenzie are 2 guys I'm looking to trade for.
Love it. I think people are underrating how big the Jamison Crowder injury is. It frees up so much. It frees up Isaiah McKenzie to play every slot in the snap. I'm really excited about Isaiah McKenzie. And as Mark said, ankle has clearly been an issue for Gabe Davis. If and when that gets right, if somebody's like bailing on Gabe Davis, and there's a lot of people bailing on them, I would definitely be buying Gabe Davis. I really like those. From Mark. Leone, go ahead.
Man, it's tough. I saw Silva capitulate and call Kenneth Walker a good stash. I like that one. I feel like you could still buy Chris Godwin this week at a higher price and it'd still be a good move, but I'll go with like kind of a twofer. I'll say if you can move Miles Sanders for Juju Smith-Schuster, that's a trade that I'm looking to make. I think Miles Sanders, he's been an incredible value, but I think he ran a little bit hot last week between the weather leading to a lot more rushing and Boston Scott being out. Over the course of the season, we could see a lot of 15 carry games that don't have a lot of high value touches, whereas Juju is on the by Leone underperforming list. Kansas City's pass rate of expectation is so high, and I feel pretty good about Juju being the number 2 target behind Kelsey. It's been somewhat spread out, but I think Juju's the leader of that committee.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I have major ceiling concerns on Juju right now, the way he's being used. Yeah. But I think that I hope you're right. Let's put it that way. I will go with one that's not going to be very popular, and nobody's going to actually want to do it. But if you want to be an alpha, the time is now to sell Nick Chubb. He has been fantasy's number 1 running back, been the best running back in the NFL, might be the best running back in the NFL. However, Cleveland has played Carolina, New York, Jets, Pittsburgh, and Atlanta. Could you map out a better first 4-game schedule for Nick Chubb to run against with leads and score touchdowns, even though their team has Jacoby Brissett at quarterback? My God, they've faced maybe 4 of the worst teams in the entire NFL so far. Okay. Next up, Chargers, Patriots, Ravens, Bengals, Dolphins, Bills, Bucks. That's their next 7 games. And there's a bye in there for 8 weeks straight starting next week. And he'll probably do well against the Chargers because they really struggle in rush defense. But for 8 games, it's going to be much thinner for Nick Chubb to get red zone carries, for Nick Chubb to get a high volume of carries. And when you don't play in the pass game like Nick Chubb doesn't, you need at least 20 carries. You need a lot of red zone carries. And so it's not comfortable, but Nick Chubb is someone that I'm sure a ton of people in your league want. The schedule is not conducive. Okay. Alpha move right there, baby.
Love it.
I can't wait till he shoves 3 touchdowns down the throat of the Chargers on Sunday. All right. That's going to do it for the rest of season top 150. Be sure you are a subscriber so you can catch myself, Silva, and Wiggins on Friday night for Team Play the Best Plays, and Leone and Dink on Establish the Million on Saturday. And you get access to our rest of season top 150. For Mark, for Leone, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.